Welcome, everybody, and thanks for joining us this afternoon. It's no longer enough for sustainable design to focus only on minimizing the impact of our built environment. Reducing our footprint won't prevent a climate catastrophe. Instead, we need to use design as a positive force. Building on decades of experience in sustainable design, earlier this year, HOK launched our Regenerative Design Studio that is committed to creating spaces that enrich our communities and renew the earth. We're using design to produce energy and clean water and to convert waste for reuse. We're creating green space and living infrastructure for our neighborhoods, all with the aim of building a regenerative future. I'm Stephanie Miller, Director of Public Relations at HOK, and with me is Sean Quinn, Director of HOK's Regenerative Design Studio, and JoAnn Garbin, Director of Innovation within CO+I Advanced Development at Microsoft. Over the next 20 to 30 minutes, we are going to explore the what and why of regenerative design, its potential impact on the natural and built environments, and how both the AEC industry and the larger business community can understand and embrace this approach. We invite everyone who is joining us today to post questions and comments in the comments section, and we will leave time at the end of the chat to respond to a couple of those. And anything we can't address during the live discussion, we will follow up with on our LinkedIn page. And this whole conversation will remain visible after we're done today. So let's dive in. And Sean, let's start with the basics. How do you define regenerative design?
Thank you so much, Stephanie. We've designed regenerative design as really the engagement with the nature of place as the initial driver for design. It follows through the emulation of natural systems that exist within a region, inspire reconnection of the community to nature, and aims to create a mutualistic benefit between nature, building, and people. Fundamentally, it's how do we take a holistic living systems approach to not only the built environment, but the incorporation of the natural environment into it. Put really simply, how do we, through development, give new life to what has formerly been depleted and lead forward with nature positive results?
JoAnn, how is regenerative design different from many of the other terms that people may be familiar with? Net zero, green, carbon negative, where does this fall in that continuum?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I'm learning from Sean and others about regenerative design over the last couple of years, and after 20 years of talking sustainability, what I've come to think of it as is the next level of sustainability. So I think we even have a diagram we crafted that shows how it is not different from the sustainability. It's the next step up, and it incorporates the efficiency, the restoration, and the renewable approaches to sustainability. But all of these things combine to take us from historically degenerative practices to future forward regenerative practices.
Sean, sustainability in its broadest sense has always been about balancing social, economic, and environmental resources. How can a focus on regenerative design nourish communities and not just the physical environment?
Yeah, it's a really great question. So everything we've done in sustainable design has really been focused through an initial lens of conservation. How do we improve efficiencies in the way that we do things, and how do we mitigate harms? Regenerative design begins to put that a little twist on its head, that we're no longer trying to only minimize our damage, we're actually trying to increase our impact. We're really focusing that impact towards the positive good. And in doing so, it really needs to fundamentally begin looking at not just the restoration of spaces that we've depleted, but really the creation of systematic flows whereby both the building, nature, and community begin to feed into each other. It's through these mutualistic loops that the community becomes an essential part and ingredient of this, both understanding the direct needs of a community where they currently exist, whether it is in a dense urban environment in New York City or a suburban landscape within Ohio. The notion of wanting to, let's say, plant 1 million trees in New York City is a great idea. But when New York did that, they didn't simply populate those trees around every area in a sort of a equal grid. They looked to those spaces within the city where there were higher concentrations of health issues, where there were worse conditions of air quality, and where access to natural systems and parks were actually further. So the redensification in those areas began to not only show how the natural environment began to thrive again in those areas, but how people's perceptions of their own environment began to improve. It resulted in both social as well as physical health benefits. That by having that direct access to nature, we are fundamentally left in a more calming environment. And as a result as well, we begin to take a more socially engaged approach to the way we view our relationship with nature. We're more caring and giving to it because we're more aware of it.
JoAnn, do you, from your perspective, have any thoughts about this blending and ability that regenerative has to bring together community, the personal and the physical?
Yeah, my domain is innovation. So design thinking, systems thinking, all of these different tools are in our kit, and regenerative is a combination of all of them. Regenerative design practices, principles, and tools are systems tools, and they really get us to do two main things. One, we take an outside in view of what we're solving, whether that's a product or a building or a space, whatever it may be. If we start from inside and design our way out, sometimes we just never get far enough to impact these social and environmental issues from a holistic standpoint. With regenerative, taking that outside in view, they're baked into our solving process. So it just changes the way we see the challenges and opportunities and who the stakeholders are in what we're solving. And then the other thing I really love about this is it just, to Sean's point, it gets you to ask different questions. So instead of how do we do less bad, how do we do more good or create value, right? So in efficiency and optimization, a lot of times it's about headed towards minimization. And in regenerative, it's really about net positive, abundance, and maximization, but across all those stakeholders. So it's just a greater challenge, and it really cracks open a lot of innovation channels.
Yeah, if I can add on to that, I think it really is that stakeholder approach that really changes so much, both in sort of a typical client consultant relationship. There's a formal separation. We understand a problem. We go off into our silo and solve it, and then go back to a client or a stakeholder and provide either a recommended solution or a range of solutions. The goal here, both with a developer or an agency trying to build out something new, or with a community that's going to take a key role in that, is looking for what we call cooperative design. That we want to make sure that we're sort of not only opening up the lenses that we share across disciplines to unsolve a problem, but that everyone that's engaged at both the upstream and downstream effects of that has a role and involvement in it. And it results in normally one of two different things. That number one, people feel ownership, that they're an equal shareholder in that process, which normally means that people put more effort into it. But the secondary thing, and I think the really important one here, thinking through regenerative not only as an environmental systems approach, but it's just a human social interactive approach, is that we understand each other better. That fundamentally, when we bring in partners and other collaborators that have a different understanding of things, we see how our expertise lenses begin to cross over. And it's when we really engage in those zones of sort of gaps of understanding, and it's filled in through openness that's not layered off, that we really begin to combine and create the sort of truest essence of integrated design, or even what we kind of commonly call transdisciplinary design. We're working across disciplines because of a nuanced understanding of what everyone else is bringing to the table. It requires more exposure and more communication, but it's in that interchange that we find the best possible solutions.
And that's innovation 101. If you
Yeah.
if you really want to get to transformational innovation, you bring diversity of thought to the table, which, at a 30,000 foot level, a lot of people are promoting diversity of thought. But when you get down to the ground level, that's different domains, different people from different places with different experiences coming together, sharing their perspectives, doing those interactive conversations, building those relationships, there's just a wide world of value to be created for everyone in an environment like that.
Well, I want to change tack a little bit from talking about people and communities to talking about data. And Sean, maybe we'll start with you. What do you see as the role of data in this conversation around regenerative design? In the past, you have talked a little bit about AI and modeling, but what do you see as that integrated relationship
Yeah,
with
so
data?
yeah, absolutely. My origins in all of this has come from a perspective of sort of building science as an application to the architectural design process. And we've scaled that up to the urban design process. What's fascinating now is being able to really integrate not only those engineering processes and urban planning processes, but that the whole world of ecosystem services is moving from something that was more viewed qualitatively to something that's being viewed very, very quantitatively. Partners that we very commonly work with at Biomimicry 3.8 and Ecometric Solutions Group are creating both sort of a real documentation and unpacking of how biological systems can solve problems. But then our partners at EMX, Ecometric Solutions Group, are actually modeling those ecosystem services. So in the same way that we understand and predict out how a building is going to function over the course of a year and then broadcast that to 30 or 50 years, how much concrete is going to embody carbon and the global warming impacts of that, how too is the soil going to sequester carbon emissions? How are the trees going to enable and provide better air quality? Or how even is that evapotranspiration effect going to help balance out temperatures that to not only avoid urban heat-on effect, but might actually result in spaces where we might be better off building less and occupying the outdoors more during those periods of the year where it's actually going to be more comfortable and more dynamic to do work, play, or simply just live outdoors. And the way that data does that is now being able to really quantify that so we can appropriately plan around that. And so what I think is going to be really fascinating in the next 3 to 5 years is how we take the processes now by which we look at how we use artificial intelligence and a digital twin to optimize the environmental systems within a building, to then actually extend that out into the outdoors, to really begin to understand not only how a tree grows, but how a forest grows with it. And then fundamentally, how do the building systems, their exhausted water use, heat use, be able to actually become part of the natural systems and reinforce them so that we leave a footprint out of our buildings that are fundamentally enhancing the natural systems around it. And by virtue of that effect, enable us to create more environmentally friendly buildings, but also smaller ones so that folks are embedded within that natural world. We don't want to just blur the boundaries between the indoors and outdoors. We want to eliminate that boundary entirely.
JoAnn, what's your perspective on this role of data? You've talked in the past about measurement dynamics that flow between the natural and the built system and AI. How do you
Yeah.
see data?
Well, I'm at Microsoft, so we see it all day, every day, and digital twins and all the products that we put into the world to help with these things. So I'll take a little bit more fundamental view of the role of data in this. In sustainability, historically, what we've been doing is an after the fact accounting process. So we do what we do, and then we footprint it we report it, and then we try to figure out how to change that footprint. And that is absolutely necessary. It's one of the many tactics we have to use. But built within the regenerative design process is the relationships and the feedback loops and the stocks and the flows and understanding all those system dynamics. And when we get ahead of those things, it not only changes the way we solve the problem, but it also it changes the way we use the data. So to Sean's point, we can integrate from an after the fact footprinting, we can go to a modeling, and we use those flows to model the impacts of our proposed solutions. And then we can also use it to predict the impacts going forward. We can use it for measurement and verification going forward. There's just, when you build that data modeling in a systems way from the start, it changes the whole life cycle of what you're putting into the world. There's just, again, it just fundamentally changes the direction you're coming from and where you end up because of it.
We've talked about in the just past few minutes, Sean, you've name checked some of our collaborators, and HOK and Microsoft are both members of Project Positive, which is an initiative sponsored by Biomimicry 3.8. Can you talk a little bit about that? What is it? First of all, how is it connected to regeneration, and why are we involved?
Well, first off, I'll start with the origins of biomimicry. Right, it started several decades ago by Janine Benyus and Dana Baumeister. Really began to want to try and unpack the intelligence that comes from 3.8 billion years of evolution. How the way that biological systems have thrived over time, do we start to use that just inherent environmental intelligence and apply it to the building challenges that we see going on around us? And then beyond that, from our perspective to other folks' perspectives, how does it impact business operations? How does it impact social engineering as well? So we've been working with biomimicry going on now for over a decade to really inform a lot of that problem solving means in our overall design process. What became fascinating over time, now through the leadership of Nicole Miller as the director there, Project Positive has arisen as a sort of a twofold opportunity, both to bring together the service providers that were commonly working together to solve these challenges. And that's being led by Biomimicry 3.8, and then coupled with HOK for planning and design, Jacobs for engineering, landscaping, and sort of advanced planning, and Ecometric Solutions Group. And these this integrated service provider partnership, it's really intended that we are able to kind of layer through all of our intelligence pretty fluidly, and that we're able to engage with what we would then commonly call our change agents. These companies that are then engaging in this dialogue with us to begin to explore the different means by which we can address these issues that they're having across either their portfolio of work, their operations, or other attributes of their business. So Project Positive then becomes this wonderful template and sort of open space for dialogue into this environment.
And from your perspective, JoAnn, what is Project Positive about? Why is it important to you and your practice?
So I was introduced to Project Positive from one of my partners in my innovation team, Caitlin Chusey, who is one of the first 100 people to get a professional cert in biomimicry. And she's one of the very first directors of biomimicry in the big tech world. Very fun partner to have, by the way. And this is her network. These are the people she's been learning from. And when she started telling me about her domain and what's possible when we put these tools in practice, I was like, how do we learn more? How do we get smarter faster? Who do we learn from? And that's when we got introduced. Well, she brought me into the loop on B38 and Project Positive. And really, that's why we're there. We're there to learn. We're there to hear the challenges and opportunities other companies are seeing, have an open dialogue about what's possible. And it's been fantastic. It's definitely been my smart pill on regenerative design over the last 2 years.
On the heels of conversation about biomimicry, we could transition to biodiversity. And we are coming on the heels of both COP and COP15, which focus specifically on the need to preserve biodiversity. How can regenerative design help with that distinct challenge? Either of you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to go with the I'm going to go with the slightly snarky result of how did we ever artificially, separate the topics of climate and biodiversity and nature and people. And so I'm going to start from there and just say, at a very philosophical level, it's inherent to regenerative design to have a positive impact. Biodiversity is just one of the many stakeholders. It's a category of stakeholder in the regenerative process. But Sean will give us the more formal, snarky answer.
I think so much about the expansion of the built environment and urbanization over the course of the past century spawned off of the Industrial Revolution, and for better or worse, we can sort of say either people were careless in the impacts that we'd have to the environment because we just didn't know, or that some just didn't care. I think what we're seeing now is we've gone in the past decade where we have 51% of the world living in cities. That depletion of the natural environment is showing itself to have real extreme consequences, not only on depletion of species and climate change, but also one of the potential origins of the COVID-19 pandemic that has left us all working in this remote world. That the way we develop in urbanistic ways currently, doing less bad is only still going to be doing some bad. And so when we start talking about re-increasing biodiversity into cities, what that really means is trying to not only reforest cities, but also to create biodiversity corridors. How do we enable that sort of small salt marsh mouse we find in the Bay Area here to continue to populate across the salt marshes, which enables those systems to thrive? And similarly, how do we create the right butterfly habitats and bat habitats that enable those sort of species to become part of that food linkage system? That all enables that ecosystem to begin to thrive. And what becomes fascinating about, I think, what's possible when we start thinking about how urban development could do good is that when we do end up living in denser urban environments, if we plan them properly, we can increase the amount of total natural space. What if our building lots that we're building on weren't trying to figure out how to fit in 25 or 35% open space, but instead we're sort of saying, no, this is a 8 to 12-story building. Let's have it be 150% natural space through creation of green roofs, green walls, unique spaces by which we can actually allow both some of those initial habitats to thrive, but also begin farming on them. We've seen this not as like a new concept. It's been done in cities in China for decades and some of the new modern cities there. We're seeing it thrive in Singapore, where concepts like lush landscape in the urban environment are really thriving, where it's now a requirement. So there's a really keen opportunity, and I think a real need that cities begin to really reforest and repopulate those natural systems through flora and fauna. And what I find so fascinating, where the role of biomimicry in all of this, is that we start not only creating buildings or habitats with the landscape, integrated into them, but we actually completely rethink about how we build those structures. We learn from the antlers of an antelope in its structure to figure out new structural systems. How might the fracture processes that occur within bones, how does that inform brace framing in a seismic environment? One of our sort of best example projects is the U.S. Coast Guard headquarters in Washington, D.C. When it was built, one of the largest green roofs in the U.S. We looked at the species that occur across the Blue Ridge Mountains and the Appalachian Mountains. And through a cascading series of green roofs, when rain falls over that building, we don't slowly pick up contaminants, we filter that water. And so when that water then feeds into the Anacostia River, which has been horribly depleted over the course of the past half century, we're slowly cleaning it. And no one building is going to solve that problem. It's when a city comes together and takes a stance towards that you start to see those environmental systems, so that biodiversity begin to come back. When you see the otter swimming up a river, because they're a little bit snobby about their water quality, like that your urban processes are now in sync with the natural systems. And it's when that systematic feed begins to happen that the natural environment is reinforcing our ability to thrive. And when the building systems are reinforcing the ability for nature to thrive as well. That's what that really means to create that biodiversity solution.
I want to dig in a little bit on that, Sean, because I think, the Coast Guard building is a great early example you shared with me that I was like,
Yeah.
oh, but there's a nuance under there of how do we get the built environment to help biodiversity or water or any of these natural or social elements. It's at the functional level. And I think that piece of the regenerative design and biomimetic processes is so critical to understand. It's not just that we're designing things that look like things or seem to be like things. It's you get in and you functionally understand the processes that nature does. And then you create systems to mimic those processes to have this similar outcomes. And because we're designing for it, we can combine different functions together more rapidly and readily than maybe nature would do through trial and error over long times, right? We can learn from all the history of nature, and we can also put our collective brilliance into it and use it to go even further faster. So there's just that functional analysis and application is one of the most powerful things about this practice.
We've been getting lots of questions in the comments. Are you two ready for a bit of a lightning round?
All righty, let's do it.
Okay, we had one great question to kick off with. Does FF&E, furniture, fixtures, and equipment here in our design world, does that have a role in regenerative design? Where does
Yeah,
it fit? How do we address it?
that's a really great question. I think one of the areas that we see expanding the most is really looking at the biological contents of materials. And so, how can we actually begin to build furniture, obviously, out of things that are more environmentally friendly? Right. Obviously, responsibly forested wood going into furniture is a great kind of first step. But what if we began looking at, mushroom growth and compacting that into bricks? What if we began looking at sort of the sort of natural weaving means that have been going on through silk and the use of wool over time? How can we incorporate those at a more appropriate scale? So again, it's beginning to look at how do we incorporate these natural systems, but also now how do we engineer biologically? It's something that probably neither of us have a real expertise in, but I see this as really kind of, at least for us, it's where we want to be partnering more with folks that are going down into that direction. That we want to make sure that everyone's individual experience not only has a positive footprint, but has a positive interaction. That story that you get when you go into a lobby space and you see, a salvaged wood that's come from, a ranch is always this sort of wonderful, sort of tactile experiential piece. But what if we actually then also had to that a real story around the biological systems growing around just outside? And how they were actually feeding into the building. What if literally 20% or more of our buildings is actually kind of just grown directly on site or near site?
And take it a step further. Honestly, there's nothing that we produce as humans that couldn't be made regeneratively. Almost everything we produce as humans, whether it's a process or a product, is in nature somewhere already happening. Um, Usually for us, it's how do we scale it, right, for the human population. But even code has much to learn from the regenerative process. So it takes, it's nothing we can dive into in the lightning round on how to precisely do that. But I can tell you what I've learned over the last 2 years is, and I've built software, hardware, buildings with software and hardware in them. Every one of the things I've ever built in my career could have used this process to make it a net positive instead of a net zero.
Well, next question is also a really great one. What is the biggest hurdle to transforming from this creating an idea stage to the implementing in the real world stage? I know in the past, JoAnn, sometimes you've talked about intentional discovery, which seems linked to this idea.
Yeah, and the shorthand of that is better ideas. So from an innovator's perspective, we've fallen into the soundbite of fail fast and taking outside of the Agile manifesto of learn, then fail fast. It can really lead to some wasted efforts and some unanticipated and unintended consequences. Whereas if we step back first, learn more and see the opportunity from as wide an angle and as many angles as possible, that systems view, draw those feedback loops, understand those dynamics as completely as you can, which at some point, you don't want analysis paralysis. So it's a balancing act. But the more you understand before you start, the better your idea is, the more valuable it is to all the stakeholders, and the less friction you will encounter along the way. Every innovation has friction. There's politics, there's funding, there's all that. But most innovations don't fail for those reasons. Most innovations fail because they just miss the mark on day one.
Sean, from your perspective, biggest hurdle?
I think the biggest hurdle is creating what I think a mentor term for me as sort of creating regenerative space. We need to take time to do this. The general way that at least especially architects and designers are trained is think fast, on your feet, on your own. And that's not the right way to innovate, and it's certainly not the right way to treat the environment. We have to be able to come up with our ideas, but we have to stop and we have to listen. And I think that's a fundamental challenge. We coming from a very kind of, assembly line methodology by which we create designs, get decisions made, go through permitting and getting things built. And we have to break that up a bit. We have to be allowed to sort of test ideas similarly that we would test out products and begin piloting some of these solutions to then bring them up to scale. And that will entail broad organizations between developers, major institutions, contractors, and especially everyone involved in the AEC industry to stop and pause and imagine how we can rethink the way that we do things and bring in partners that we haven't historically perceived as being part of that process. And that's challenging. That's a natural friction to sort of say, we know that the development of a new hospital or a new stadium is going to impact the community. And we know that, showing some of those early design ideas, right? The initial thing is going to be not in my backyard. But we have to figure out the right way to engage with those partners. And similarly, just to innovate our construction process, we need to think outside of our pure isolated lenses. We have to partner with contractors. We have to partner with other folks that are looking at things through biological systems practices to really integrate ideas that are commonly siloed apart from each other. And I think that's always the biggest challenge. Our metrics and frameworks of working are built around separation, and we have to really break those down.
Biggest challenge, biggest opportunity. And I mean, this is what we talked about early on. The more domains and the more people you bring together in a productive way, you can't just throw everybody in a room and say, what do you want?
Yeah.
You have to have a disciplined approach to the innovation process. But through that, that's how you get those transformations. It's not in a room by yourself. None of us are that smart. Like I will be the first one to say, I'm not that smart. So I surround myself with as many brilliant people as I can and learn, and that step back and learn from one another and what's around us is so critical.
I think actually to just follow up on that, it's really sharing these lessons. We are often protective of intellectual property, and there's a certain reason for that. But when we're talking about trying to address issues of climate change, we have to find a way to be able to share some of our solutions with each other in a way that enables everyone to address this. Right? Whoever's innovated first is going to be at the front end of that field. So I hope people don't feel that much risk in there. But man, we want people to come with us. Yeah.
Well, we've addressed it with that question about FF&E, but one of the other queries was about scale. Micro, macro, is this only at the landscape scale? Is it at the city scale? How do you address those questions about scale with regenerative design?
Yes.
Oh man, this one, yeah, yes, it's all scales. Yeah.
Yeah.
From HOK side, we began at the planning level, looking at our largest 1,000-hectare plus developments and how we could bring in a real nuanced approach to studying the land, the ecological performance systems that exist there, and then where do and how do buildings arise from that? How do products arise from that? Similarly, we know that folks are looking at that from the microscale on up. When you start talking about FF&E, right? How do you create a new building block out of a locally based natural system? And once you start doing that and resolving that, you're going to start to be able to think from that one practical little pilot project to how would I do that for the whole building, for a bigger building, for a neighborhood, for a whole new city. And that's where this will go in both directions. There's nothing that stops us from looking at this at a variety of scales.
Yeah. Sean, you embedded in there two of the most powerful questions in innovation. How might this impact my product or service? What if my product or service was regenerative? What would that look like? You can start that simply by asking those questions and then take a piece try it. Take the whole system, try it. A lot of just getting to the whiteboard, getting to a piece of paper with a pen, thought experiments. There's a lot that can be uncovered without investment. If you are going to get a group of people in a room and say, what do you want? Maybe just ask them, how might we make this regenerative? And then get to the whiteboard and sketch some ideas.
Well, we've had a lot of good questions come in, but sensitive to time, we are going to wrap up. So I throw it back to both of you. Any final thoughts that you want to leave with the audience?
Go ahead, Sean.
All right. I think one of the biggest ones, one of the largest questions that we get, because HOK is a relatively large architectural engineering firm, is that, well, of course you can do it at your scale firm. But even within an organization like ours, it's a series of small teams that compose that larger whole. We need to bring in expertise at all scales, from small independent think tanks to large corporations to government agencies down to every different building size. Everyone has an ability to contribute to these solutions in a variety of different ways. And it's really in finding those right partners, engaging in this prolonged dialogue, that we start to really unpack a pathway, a strategy by which we can address these issues. HOK isn't able to do it on our own. We bring in biomimicry into many of our projects. They bring us into many of theirs now. And in that partnership with Jacobs and EMX, we're finding ways by which we solve things that we can't solve on our own. So whether you are small, medium, large, extra large, or just a single person, you have a space in this new mode of thinking of design to really contribute to a completely new and evolving field. The regenerative revolution, the goal in trying to find nature positive solutions, is a phenomenal mission, challenge, and opportunity. And so we want to just invite everyone to be involved in that discussion, wherever you come from and however, what scale you're at working at those solutions, to begin to contribute to this dialogue. Because this is where we want everything to focus, to not only address climate change, but to find the right new future way of building cities, going to work, and living our lives.
JoAnn, final thought?
I'll leave mine with a couple that I say a lot and hope, I live up to them over time and maybe they stick. One is sustainability is innovation. It has been for me for 25 years. And for me, innovation is value creation. Therefore, sustainability is value creation. Regenerative design is this next level of sustainability. So therefore, it is value creation. And as an innovator, I say often, it's the responsibility as an innovator, especially as a professional innovator, because I think everybody can be innovative. But if you're paid to innovate, I think it's our responsibility to look further, beyond what's being asked to what's actually needed. If we've got the privilege of creating the future, we should take that responsibility to heart and do everything we can to create the future we want.
Thank you both. This has been a great conversation, and hopefully for everyone who has listened in today, it's provided some insight. If you do have questions that we were not able to get to, please drop them in the chat and we will talk with JoAnn and Sean and we'll respond to you on LinkedIn. If you don't follow Sean and JoAnn, please do. And we look forward to continuing the conversation. Thanks, everyone.